All right, so I'll go ahead and get us started. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our third Equity Advisory Roundtable. My name is Sequoia Erasmus and I am the Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement with the planning team at the California Transportation Commission, and I will be facilitating our meeting today. Before we get started with our agenda items, I'll turn it over to our interpreter to provide information on how to access Spanish interpretation services, and then turn it over to Justin Hall, who will provide information on closed captioning and American Sign Language services. Additionally, Justin will share some tips for using GoToWebinar, including how to provide public comment. Justin?
Thank you, Sequoia. Welcome to the Equity Advisory Roundtable meeting. Live closed captioning, Spanish language, and American Sign Language interpretation are being provided for this meeting. The ASL interpreter will be live on camera throughout. The closed captioning links can be found on our Equity Advisory Meetings page under the September 16th heading. For the public, we welcome comments from the public as part of each item at this meeting. We encourage you to use the raise hand feature as early into the item as you can to give the system time to acknowledge you. For participants joining us through the GoToWebinar system, please find the webinar panel likely located on the right-hand side of your screen. There you will find the audio and question tabs. Under the audio tab, attendees will have the choice to listen in via the computer or telephone option. Should you prefer computer audio, please ensure the appropriate box is selected. If you choose the phone call option, select the corresponding box and dial the phone number, access code, and audio PIN as directed by the automated system. Please note that if the audio PIN is not entered, you will remain in listen-only mode and will be unable to speak to the Commission should you have any comments. As a reminder, each registered attendee is provided a unique link and phone number to access the webinar. These cannot be shared with other participants, and they are registered to a specific attendee. There are two options for participants to provide comments on agenda items. Click on the hand icon to indicate you wish to make a comment. You will then be unmuted and called upon to make your comment. Please be sure to state your name and affiliation prior to voicing your remarks. Alternately, you may use the questions tab, type in the agenda item and the number you're commenting on and your comment. Commission staff will read the comment on your behalf. Please do your best to be concise with your comments. Thank you for joining us today. We know your time is valuable and we appreciate you sharing some time with us.
Thanks very much, Justin. So we'll need to just go back on the slides to get the Spanish interpreter information.
Ms. Sequoia, this is a Spanish interpreter. The Spanish interpreter conducted a simultaneous interpretation of the instructions on the Spanish line. I will be happy to provide the telephone number in Spanish on this line, but everything has been interpreted so far. Los servicios de interpretación van a estar disponibles en este momento. Si pueden llamar, por favor, el número telefónico 844-460-1325 y pueden escuchar una interpretación simultánea de todo el webinario. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Gracias. Okay, so the first item on our agenda today is a roll call to establish which roundtable members are present, and I'll ask Bridget Driller to please call the roll.
Thank you, Sequoia. As I call your name, please let me know if you are present. Ruby Acevedo. Jacob Babauta. Keith Bergthold. Tamika Butler.
Present.
Thank you. Rodney Fong, Naila Popardin.
Present.
Thank you. Jasmine Lee,
Present.
thank you. Lena Moran Acereto,
Present.
thanks Lena. Rio Ocas.
Present. Rio Oshas.
Oshas, thank you Rio. Sorry about that. Stephanie Ramirez. Russell Rawlings. Leslie Sanders.
Hi, I'm present.
Thanks,
This is
Stephanie.
Stephanie Ramirez.
And Leslie Sanders is present as well.
Thank you, Leslie. Connie Stewart.
Oh, sorry, I'm present.
Thanks, Connie. Yvette Torres.
Present.
Randy Torres Van Vleck.
Present.
Thank you. Kiana Valentine.
Present.
Thank you. And lastly, Gerard Wright. Gerard, I think you're muted. We can see that you're here. We'll work with you on your audio.
Okay, I was unmuted for a little bit and it's organized, so I'm here, present.
Okay, great. We can hear you. Was there anyone I missed in the roll call who's here?
You've got State Senator Josh Newman. I'm the Senate's ex officio representative to the CTC. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Senator Newman. Thank you for joining us. Okay, with that, I will turn it back to Sequoia.
Thank you very much. So for tab 2, we have welcome and reflections from previous meetings, and we'll soon be joined by Commission Chair Norton. But we currently have Jeannie Ward-Waller, Caltrans Deputy Director of Planning and Modal Programs, and we'll be offering some welcoming remarks and taking some time to reflect on previous meetings. As the incoming Associate Deputy Director of Equity and Engagement with the Commission, I, Sequoia, am grateful for the work of my team members and our agency partners at Caltrans and the California State Transportation Agency. Together, they've really helped put together past roundtable meetings and are diligently working towards improving equity outcomes in transportation throughout the state of California. As we work towards integrating equity principles into our policies, our programs, and our practices, it's easy to see that there is still a lot of work to be done. And especially thank you to the roundtable members who have been able to support the development of today's informational panel. I'm very hopeful that the expertise present here on this roundtable and that of our partners and advocacy allies can and will help shape our transportation futures in California and beyond. Additionally, we have been, as a note, we have been successful in coordinating the distribution of stipends for roundtable members who have requested it. So thank you also to the folks who made that happen. And finally, thanks to Chair Norton, Commissioner Liu, Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Davis, and ex officio Commissioner Senator Josh Newman, and other commissioners who may join us later, and our roundtable members and agency partners for your continued collaboration and support of this critical work. I'll now pass it on to Jeannie Ward-Waller for remarks and reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Sequoia, and hello, everyone. Great to see you. It's such a pleasure to have such a diverse group on these meetings, and to be a part of the kickoff here with Sequoia. Thank you for inviting us to kind of help kick off the meeting. really looking forward to the agenda and the discussion, particularly our staff, Amar and Carolyn, are both here from Caltrans, from our Office of Race and Equity, and are going to share an update on some of the work we're doing on engagement and equity, as well as have continued the discussion on the equity listening sessions, which we talked about quite a bit last time and had really robust discussion with you. So just sharing, some reflections on that. Just want to really appreciate the very frank input that you all provided. I think there were a number of items you discussed, lots of points you all made for us as we are getting ready to embark on a pretty robust round of listening sessions that we will be hosting jointly with CTC and with CalSTA. We've just executed the contract with ICF, who will be the consultant lead for that project. And we're really excited to share with you some more of the details now that we've actually kicked off the contract of what we're thinking about on that. But I want to just reiterate that the feedback that you provided us has been shared with our management. It's definitely informing how we're going forward with the listening sessions. And this is really early stages of work that is getting infused into the culture at Caltrans across our work. It's really a high priority in our strategic plan and for our whole executive team up to our director. So I want to just stress that we have the strong support of management at Caltrans. I know CalSTA, the CalSTA secretary and CTC as well, all the commissioners and the CTC exec management are also very committed to this work. So I want to just appreciate the great interagency coordination we've had with CTC staff and also with Avital at CalSTA. We're meeting regularly and doing a ton of coordination. So it just really demonstrates what a priority this has become for all of our agencies. And so it's really exciting to be a part of that and to be able to make a contribution and also to grow a team at Caltrans that's really focused on this work. So yeah, I won't go on too long, but I want to just appreciate the concerns you raised, the challenges we're very much aware of, yeah, we look forward to continuing the conversation with you as we get further into this effort and then figure out the next steps from there as we go into forming a standing advisory body that will continue to work with our agencies and help guide us through this work as we go forward. I also just, in my opening comments, want to introduce Carolyn. Carolyn Abrams just joined our team. We're really excited to have her, and you will get a chance to meet her during this meeting. She has stepped into the role of the Priority Populations Program Manager in our Office of Race and Equity. She holds a Master of Urban and Regional Planning from UCLA and a Bachelor of Science in Community and Regional Development from UC Davis. Her background is in policy and solutions-oriented research. Her work over the past 6 years has largely involved multidisciplinary projects focused on the analysis of equitable land use and planning, with particular attention to communities that are historically under-resourced and overburdened by economic, health, and environmental disparities. So really happy to have Carolyn join the team. I know some of you may have already interacted with her in her previous role, but yeah, we're excited to be growing our team and bringing her in. So with that, Sequoia, I know we're going to have a lot of discussion, and both Amar and Carolyn are going to give updates on our engagement efforts in the listening session. So I don't want to take up too much time. I'll pass back to you.
Thanks, Jeannie. And I'll double check now if Chair Norton is on the line yet. Okay, we'll have her give her remarks when she's able to join us in a couple minutes. Thanks again, Jeannie, for offering that. And I also wanted to give a special thank you to our ASL and Spanish interpreters on the line today. Thank you so much for providing that for us today. So finally, I want to remind everyone that this meeting is open to the public and that we will be taking public comment on each item after Roundtable members have concluded their questions and discussions. So for folks on the line, please follow the instructions for adding public comment. All right, now I'll move to, item 3, May 26th Roundtable meeting minutes. Bridget will be offering tab 3.
Thank you, Sequoia. Karen just let me know that she's having some technology issues, so I'll cover her item, but if Karen's able to get reconnected, feel free to pop in. Good afternoon, Roundtable members and members of the public, and Shana Tova to those observing Yom Kippur. For agenda item 3, I would like to present the meeting minutes from our May 26th Roundtable meeting. These minutes were posted online on September 3rd and sent out to Roundtable members and stakeholders. The minutes summarize the May 26th meeting and are intended to provide information about the meeting. At this time, we would like to ask Roundtable members if there are any suggested edits for the May 26th Roundtable meeting minutes. Are there any edits or questions about the minutes? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we will move forward with posting the meeting minutes on our webpage. And with that, I'll conclude the agenda item and turn it back to Sequoia. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And before I turn it over to public comment, I also wanted to extend a warm welcome to our newest commissioner, Falcon, who's joined us on the line. Welcome. We're really excited that you could join us today. So now, Justin, please let us know if we have any public comment on this item.
Thank you, Sequoia. I see no attendees indicating they're looking to make public comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I'll move on to tab 4. Back to Bridget for a Roundtable charter finalization.
Thank you, Sequoia. So I will be providing an update on the Roundtable charter. Previous versions of the Roundtable charter have been presented to the Roundtable members at the first and second meetings. At those meetings, Roundtable members shared incredibly valuable observations and recommendations that have greatly improved the charter documents. Commission staff have worked to incorporate this feedback into a final version, which was posted online and shared with Roundtable members earlier this month. I want to highlight a change to the Roundtable charter since our last meeting. While some Roundtable members have expressed interest in co-developing an equity definition and framework in partnership with state agency staff, other members have expressed a desire to focus on more action-oriented items. To acknowledge this feedback, we have added language to the final charter to indicate that the work of developing an equity definition and framework may extend beyond the length of the Roundtable effort and be informed by the Equity Advisory Committee, which we will be discussing in more detail later this meeting. This would provide flexibility to the Roundtable to focus on time-sensitive topics such as the development of an Equity Advisory Committee, community listening sessions, and transportation funding program guidelines. We envision the Roundtable charter as a living document, and if at any time in the Roundtable process you would like to propose changes, please let any of our staff know, and we can bring that to a future meeting. With that, I'd like to ask if there are any questions or comments from Roundtable members on the charter. Okay, I am not seeing or hearing any questions or comments. I will turn it back to Sequoia to check if there's any other public comments on this item.
I also invite commissioner comments or questions on this, on the charter. Okay, thank you. Hearing none. Justin, are there any public comments?
Yes, Sequoia, we do have one written comment submitted at this time. This comes from Leah Van Winkle. She writes, "My name is Leah, here with Dio and other Wood Street residents, an encampment in West Oakland. We would like to have unhoused voices represented on this committee." Thank you.
Great, thank you, Justin. Justin, do you want to go ahead and call on the Spanish interpreter to see if there are any public comments on the Spanish line?
Sure. Yeah, I guess the Spanish, I'm asking if the Spanish interpreter has anybody looking to make comment on their line?
Yeah, is the Spanish interpreter on to confirm whether or not there are comments on the line?
They are on at this time. I don't see any indication that there is a comment at this time.
Okay. Okay, well, if there are no further comments, staff will go ahead and post the final charter. And with that, I think that concludes this item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Doing one more check to see if Chair Norton has made it. I don't see her on the list. Okay. We will move on then to tab 5, please, for updates from Caltrans staff regarding equity and engagement efforts across the state. Amar and Carolyn, please take it away.
Hello, everybody. It's hard to see everybody in this virtual platform, but I know you're there. Thank you for your time. I also wanted to just shout out that it is Latino, Latina, Latinx Heritage Month, kicked off yesterday for those that celebrate. I would encourage all folks to engage with all of your brothers and sisters and people in this space. Especially incorporating our Afro, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx into this Heritage Month. Yeah, so I'm gonna kick off with our engagement. I think Jeannie did a great job at highlighting how valuable your input from the last session was within the Caltrans space. I know virtually there was a lot of Caltrans members watching, hearing, taking into account how folks can really change up their own programs, what sphere of control that they have when it comes to making sure community voices are at the forefront of our work. So thank you again for that. We've had many discussions since May around really incorporating that feedback, again, reviewing our guidelines, changing our programs, and also developing a space and a path forward to make changes. So talking a little bit about our engagement efforts, let's go to the next slide. I think one thing to note is that this is an ongoing effort to make improvements with our community members. We have a lot of efforts going on throughout the state, throughout all of our districts, throughout all of headquarters, in the engagement, in equitable engagement spaces. And one of those efforts was really an opportunity to pull all of our districts together, to pull headquarters together into finding and looking at our communities that have been most impacted by our freeway system. So an initial preliminary investigation, we pulled at minimum 70 communities throughout the state that have been impacted, that have been segmented, separated by our freeway system. With this very quick PI, we started looking at a way to address the RAISE grant, so the Rebuilding America Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. And so we had partnerships on this grant over the summer, but Caltrans was looking at a way to really bridge that harm. And if we think about our equity statement and we think about the Secretary's discussion at addressing that harm, this was a great opportunity to show up as a state agency in that space. So identifying our communities and submitting an application for this funding in a planning way to identify how Caltrans can really structure and reconnect communities. It was a really great opportunity to see how the districts were working within the community to identify, looking at where support for this particular effort was coming from, and really advancing not only just this application, but how we can make it more of a program within our sphere of work. Ultimately, out of the 70+ communities that were identified, we did select 5 communities to go forward on this funding opportunity. We can go to the next slide. Those communities included various communities within Los Angeles. We kept Los Angeles broad. That included Ventura. We included San Diego Portside communities, the community of Selma, which is in Central Valley, Modesto, and then Colton, which is in the San Bernardino area. We did keep some of the communities a little bit more vague so that when we get into this process of identifying communities, that we would also look at where community wants to engage with Caltrans. So it's not, again, Caltrans identifying something and then trying to build something around that. We want to make sure that communities' voices and narrative is part of this process. So the idea here is to really strengthen and build our relationships. There's been a lot of severed trust in the past, and so this is an opportunity to start doing that. Within the identification process alone, we had community members working with our Caltrans districts that had not engaged in the past, and so that was a great opportunity to make connections. This partnership is looking at how we can strengthen those narratives in all of our processes, how we can strengthen our work, and really incorporate community at all aspects. We intend to listen and to work with community for their perspectives and identifying how they have been harmed and how we need to serve them in fixing and addressing that harm. And then also looking at opportunities to address that harm, and be it capping freeways, be it increasing transit access, be it a whole host of opportunities that the community may want to engage in when it comes to reconnecting. Within that space, beyond identifying projects or beyond identifying means to do so, it's developing a space and guidance for the state to address and identify underserved or harmed communities, and then also have a space where we look at the guidebook for addressing and looking at means to mitigate displacement. So if we're looking at addressing harm and we're supporting community narrative and we're supporting community-driven projects, we also want to be mindful that some investments may inadvertently lead to displacement. So coming up with an anti-displacement policy within this guidebook and framework at the upfront process of funding is going to be very monumental in how we look at addressing the harm in real lived experiences with community members. Let's go to the next slide. Part of this work kicked off earlier in the spring. We submitted the RAISE grant in July, and we're going to be looking for an award by November. With or without the award from the U.S. government, Caltrans has made a commitment to engage in the opportunity of reconnecting communities. And so building out that platform is something that we're going to look at even without those resources, and finding a means within our own programs to move that effort. It is outlined through our strategic plan to document multiple actions around meaningful engagement and what that looks like. We have different actions, different performance objectives across all of our sphere of work, including project delivery, planning, environmental, and part of that is looking at who within our agency is equipped to do engagement? What does that engagement look like for each community? How do we have a space where the folks that are supposed to engage with community understand what those needs are, what challenges may lie ahead, and how to navigate, again, without perpetuating that harm. So from our strategic plan, we're working on that engagement effort across all of our work. There's a lot of coordination taking place around engagement. My office is working with planning and modal programs, DOTP, the Division of Planning, Division of Rail and Mass Transportation, multiple districts to really level up and figure out a way and path forward that meets all of our community needs. Some of this work also is looking at developing tools and metrics to documenting meaningful engagement. Where are we at with our baseline? How have we measured engagement in the past? Is it meaningful? Has it been something that community can really sign off on and say that we're doing right? So in that process, it's looking at what our baseline is and then how can we increase meaningful engagement. Our internal equity training is one path forward, again, looking at who has the skills and expertise to really do this work. And part of that is making sure that our staff understand what equity is and how it is different for a lot of our different members across the state. And so there's a partnership right now with CORE and the Division of Planning to really build out a training platform for equitable engagement. Let's go to the next slide. And that training is going to take place over the next 6 months. And so the thought process here is identifying folks within the districts that are responsible for engagement, or folks that are going to start volunteering or moving their efforts in towards that engagement. And so we hope to develop an equity engagement pilot project for our targeted members within the districts and within headquarters and certain programs, develop guidance, develop toolkits and workbooks for internal learning and unlearning within this process, and then also moving on to train the trainer, right? So that we can cover all equity training aspects, and it goes beyond like certain classifications, so that we're touching all folks within Caltrans who have the knowledge and tools to do such work, so that it's not just falling on certain members' shoulders to engage or not engage with community members. So this training effort is really exciting. We have a team on board that has been dedicated to looking at different public planning engagement practices for quite some time. And it's really exciting to see how many folks are interested in learning new ways, unlearning old ways, and really being able to connect with community members. Within this engagement space, I mentioned earlier, we're looking at baselines. We're looking at documenting how we are improving our engagement efforts through multiple tools, that we want to have transparency so that members of the public can also look and see where engagement is taking place, what engagement is taking place on certain projects, and how community members are commenting or talking about certain types of engagement or project development. So right there, I'm going to pause. That's just kind of a broader update on where we are at with engagement. I think it's really exciting. There's a lot of, again, education that within our internal structures need to take place if we want to make sure that we're including community narrative in a different capacity, so that it's not devaluing that process, and it's not really taking away from community voice in all of our work. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our newest member, Carolyn Abrams, and she is going to provide us an update on the listening sessions.
Perfect. Thank you, Ahmad. And hi, everyone. Again, I'm Carolyn Abrams, Priority Populations Program Manager with CORE. And like Amar said, I just wanted to provide a quick update about the equity listening sessions that we'll be conducting later this year. Next slide, please. Just to provide a bit of an overview, and I think a lot of you probably recall this conversation from the last roundtable meeting, but essentially Caltrans, CTC, and agency are hosting 6 equity-focused community listening sessions that essentially center California residents. And so we're looking at these sessions to be conducted virtually later this year, and They're currently planned to have either a geographic or a population population focus, which I'll provide more detail on in just a minute. And essentially, the agencies that will essentially be working with community-based organizations and other partners to specifically engage communities that have been historically under-resourced and overburdened by transportation disparities. Next slide, please. So the goal of these sessions is really to allow people to share their personal stories about the impacts of the transportation system, both on them as individuals and also on the communities that they live in. And part of this process will be identifying opportunities, needs, and challenges related to transportation. So the listening sessions are designed to be accessible, inclusive, and we really want to create a safe and welcoming environment for community members to describe how the transportation system has impacted their lives. And at the end of the day, the product that we're intending to produce will be the development of an actionable report. And this is really intended to guide executive staff at the agency level on how to implement equity-oriented change in California's transportation system. Next slide. So Caltrans is now under contract with ICF Consulting to organize and facilitate the listening sessions. And a few dates to make note of that are probably of interest to folks here. The listening sessions will likely take place in early December and late January. And leading up to these sessions, ICF plans to conduct a facilitation training for Caltrans, CTC, and agency staff. And we'll also be developing the subcontracts with the community-based organizations, which will help with the assistance around stakeholder engagement. And then essentially the report is anticipated to be released in 2022. Next slide. So as Amada mentioned, there's a few focus areas for consideration, some of which have been identified in with some of these other statewide initiatives. So as far as geographic focus areas go, some of the ones that we've been considering include Selma and Stockton, which are both in the Central Valley. We're also looking at San Diego portside communities and the LA portside communities. Others for consideration are South or East LA, Oakland, and also Lake County, or perhaps another rural community in Northern California. And then as far as populations that are potential priorities for us, we're looking at youth. We're also looking at tribal governments and sovereign nations, people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness or inadequate housing, perhaps also working with some of the housing advocates around this population. Also people who are formerly incarcerated or system impacted, and also Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the listening sessions are designed to be accessible and inclusive. And in order to achieve this, these are some of the points in our work plan that we've put into place that will hopefully support this effort. So as I mentioned, ICF will be conducting a facilitation training for agency staff. And then the listening sessions themselves will be jointly facilitated by the ICF consultants and our core staff. And then we're partnering with and compensating CBOs to support outreach and engagement. And we've also, at this point, made the decision to ideally hold these sessions as closed sessions so that we can provide direct and intentional invitations to participants, which will allow for that space to be a little bit more of a place where everyone can participate, where we're not where it's not entirely open to the public, but the folks that are in the room are folks that we're really trying to hear from. And then essentially the final report will be developed and disseminated to document the findings from the listening sessions. Next slide, and I think that's it. So if there's any questions, we're happy to take them.
Hi, this is Commissioner Eager. I did have a question. And this is on what the selection process was for those areas for both the listening sessions and those focus areas. I heard, somewhere in Southern California, LA, and then really specifically to the city of Selma. So how did you decide on those criteria?
There was a lot of different factors around selection. For Selma, there was a lot of community support that came into play to that community being directly called out. It was also a space where Selma had been underrepresented in the past when looking at freeway harm or freeway segmentation. For Los Angeles and Ventura, it's a larger population, and there's a lot of different access points and separation points that trying to narrow that down, I think, was going to take a lot more time than we had in the RAISE application. So leaving that open a little bit more so that within the process of reconnecting communities, there would be a little bit more of kind of surveying, touching in with different community groups, different neighborhoods within Los Angeles and Ventura to really hone in and identify the communities that we're going to focus on for the pilot. For San Diego portside communities, that area was identified because there's a larger support, larger CBO and advocacy support there. Also being identified as AB 617 communities, where it's the very specific climate and community neighborhood, metrics for air quality and GHG emissions in that particular area.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Eager, I'll just add, this is Jeannie Ward-Wallet, that our Caltrans districts nominated many communities to be part of this effort. And Amar said that I think we got upwards of like 70 different communities, different neighborhoods that we should take a look at and we should do deeper work in. So we anticipate this grant, if we get the grant from the RAISE program, to kind of be a start to that work. But I think there's, really a lot of commitment from Caltrans, from agency, from CTC on continuing this kind of work. So we think, we anticipate getting to all of those communities and doing this same level of planning and needs assessment and work engagement with the communities to better understand their needs, and then ultimately do our project work differently in those communities going forward.
Okay, thank you. And I didn't want it to sound like I wasn't a fan of Selma, because I certainly am, from Fresno County, and Selma is one of my cities, and we actually have a Central Valley Training Center that we started there with the High Speed Rail Authority, and specifically for people of color and people who have been left out of the system forever, to get them trained to work in transportation and construction. So I'm big on Selma, but there are certainly a lot of communities up and down the valley that are in that same position. So if this is the pilot program and there's many more to come, I'm all for it.
Great. Thank you for that.
Okay, if I jump in here. I'm not saying anything, I assume so. Yeah, I think I agree with Commissioner Eager. We could select different geographic areas all day and all night. I mean, it did stand out to me that there's no Inland Empire region in the list that you provided, but I mean, I get it. It's a little bit hard to find and identify specifically exactly where you want to focus, but certainly the Inland Empire is one that both has had a lot of impacts, and there are a lot in the making for them too. And especially I saw it South Los Angeles and East Los Angeles. East Los Angeles has, I think, the highest density of freeways anywhere in California, so we should probably take that one pretty seriously. But I don't want to focus just on the geographic issue, because I think we could just go down that rabbit hole and never come out. I was very glad to see that you're going to be compensating the participants and the groups for helping do outreach and participate in it. I think that's really important. It shows that we value their time and their effort, and recognize that they deserve compensation for participating, and we have an obligation to do that. That's good to see. I am a little concerned, how successful it will be, quite honestly, because there's a big trust factor involved here. And we're asking these communities to come to us and to trust us that we're genuine in our commitment to addressing transportation equity, that their engagement will not be a waste of their time, nor will we be taking advantage of their willingness to be open and honest with us. And we're going to have to anticipate a long period of venting from a lot of people who have a lot of pent up anger over the decades of transportation injustices that they've suffered. So I hope we're all prepared for that. I'm also interested in getting an idea of where the leadership is going to be and how the leadership of the agency and the department, and certainly with CTC, are going to be engaging in this process. I think it's extremely important, and I'm so glad to see my fellow commissioners and here with us today, and Mitch, senior staff and all of that participating in this event. And it's great to have you here, Jeannie. But I think it's really important that the highest levels of leadership participate in some way, shape, or form. And I can tell you, because I can't even remember how many years ago it was 20 years ago or so, that we went through this process with Cal EPA, and they formed a Cal EPA advisory committee for environmental justice, and we went all over the state, and we had meetings upon meetings upon meetings. But one of the things that was really impactful for those of us who served on that advisory committee was that the secretary of Cal EPA at the time was Winston Hickox, and he showed up to almost every one of our meetings and sat in the audience and listened. It showed a commitment of leadership. So I think we should try to mimic that. It was very successful. If nothing else, it proved that he cared about what we were doing and the recommendations we were generating at the time. So, and I also worry a bit about the expectations. If we're saying we're going to go through this process and we're going to generate a report and some findings, I think we need to talk about how we expect those findings in that report to be used. So that people think that there's some real value. So many reports get issued, and someone might pay attention to it for a day or two, but we want to talk about how the report and the findings will be used to create the sort of systemic change that we're trying to get at here. So I would hope that you talk about the outcomes beyond just the report. So those are my feelings, initial line of thought. Thank you for taking the time to listen to them.
Commissioner Liu, thank you. I just want to respond, since I think your comment was partly directed at Caltrans management. And I've had a number of conversations with Tokes and with Mike Keever, our Chief Deputy, Tokes Omashak, our Director, and also Mike Keever, our Chief Deputy at Caltrans, about the listening sessions and their engagement, and also the follow-up to the listening session. So your point is extremely important about the report and what we do with it and how we build trust going forward. We're not going to build trust in one set of listening sessions. We're going to build trust from what we do coming out of those listening sessions, and how we record what we hear, how we share that back to the community, and then how we act on it. So we absolutely are very mindful of that. And I think, would like to hear from you at CTC as well, since this is a joint effort. I know Avital is here from CalSTA as well, and is also in communication with Secretary Kim and Undersecretary Konov about this. So we really do have a shared responsibility as we're doing this effort jointly to agree to come to some consensus on how we're going to participate in these dialogues, and then what we will do coming out of them. And I think just one other point I want to make, just to set some expectations, but also get your input on how commissioners and executive management participate in these sessions. We're mindful that if we have too many sort of high-level state government officials in the session or listening in on Zoom, it might set up a power dynamic where people don't feel comfortable speaking and sharing their thoughts. So we're trying to think carefully about how we do that, how we show up, what kind of tone that sets in the meeting, making sure we're coming with open hearts, ready to listen, being genuine, and hearing the feedback at the highest levels, just as you're saying. But I think one thing for Caltrans that's important in terms of how we go forward in follow-up to the sessions is the Caltrans district directors are very important in certain locations to have that ongoing relationship and understand the needs, and then be able to follow up on it with planning and project work. And so not just, sort of having the officials from Sacramento, but also the officials that are there on the ground and need to really understand more deeply the needs of their local communities is important as well. So there are just a lot of folks, I think, that we want to participate, that we want to make sure hear what is said in those sessions, but having all of those people in the room will, I think, be too many to really make space and create the right space for honest feedback from the folks we really want to hear from. So those are just a few of my thoughts in response. We definitely are going to have more discussion with you before we actually get to the listening session. So really want to hear more from all of you on your expectations. But Amar, I don't know if you want to say anything else about it, or Carolyn, because you've thought a lot about the scope and the tone of these listening sessions.
Yeah, I think you covered it, Jeannie. And I agree with Commissioner's comments. There's a lot to navigate within these listening sessions. I think that's kind of one of the reasons we're trying to be very careful about this. It did take a long time to execute the contract. And now we're in a space where it's, we have all of Caltrans to think about, all of California to think about. How do we make sure we're holding enough space for community members to actually engage and be honest with us so that we can take that? And then also, again, how are we going to use what we hear? Like, that's a big concern on our end of again, not taking this information and developing reports, but really making this experience valued for community members so that we can make those changes. So I agree, and I'll pass it back. I think there are some questions that I'm now seeing in the chat from folks.
Well, actually, if I'm not allowed to speak, I just wanted to at least echo a lot of what Joe has said about the importance of, of that dialogue, and looking at it from a perspective of, this is a great foundation, and I know staff has been working hard to at least get to this level, and now we have to look at it from, I look at it from the expectation of, using an example in LA County with Measure M. That was a sales tax issue, but it's the same kind of process. Like, you have to build the rapport, you have to build the trust, and it didn't happen over one campaign. It happened after what happened in 2012, and that took 4 years of constant communication, back and forth feedback, so that you do come to a consensus around some key issues. Even there were some small disagreements, but the key word here is they were small, but they understood what the process was about. And I think the same approach, not saying this is a campaign, but the same, I think, important approach and very considerate approach will be necessary here. And let's say for the first couple listening sessions, you only have a couple executive leaders, and just the rest are just staff jotting down notes and say, hey, do we have what you got down accurately? And just continuing that type of dialogue to build the trust that's needed longer term, so that if we're in terms of equity, to me a lot of equity is about just being able to have the conversation and listen, hear each other, and understand where we're coming from to get to that next step, to get to that next destination. And I think that's so critical.
Thank you, Jared. I'm just going to jump in now. I just want to thank everybody for their efforts to get us to this point. I know it took a long time, a lot more time than we wanted during some of the earlier work, and I want to make sure as we get to these listening sessions, we're focused more on doing it right, not doing it fast. And I think, we need to take the time to say, okay, we are asking you roundtable members for your input on what's on these PowerPoints. I hope we're not taking a position where we as state bureaucrats are sitting in our office doing this. Part of the reason that this roundtable was formed and why the commission, part of the reason the roundtable was formed was to give input on the listening sessions. And part of the reason the commission directed the listening sessions was to really hear from everybody and help us co-create that. So I just want to stress the importance of doing that, and not just coming, and telling around, making sure the round table members know this is not, these things are not decided. We're asking for your input on these things. I also want to assure Jeannie we will not have a quorum of commissioners at these, or I'll do my best to make sure we don't have a quorum of commissioners at these. And I really appreciate a couple things that were said that I want to reiterate. The importance of saying, we're kicking this off with a half a dozen, but in order for this to really work, this has to be a change in how we, and more Caltrans than the commission or CalSTAR, because Caltrans is the one who's touching people's lives more on a daily basis. This has to be a part of how we're all doing business, not just a we're out, tell us what you say today. So I really appreciate that you really alluded to that type of thing, Jeannie. And Joe, I appreciate what you said about expectations and outcomes. And I think this is an area where the commission can play an important role because we are programmatically independent from the rest of the administration, and we're statutorily required to advise the legislature each year. So, I think there's a lot of what we'll hear that may be out of our control, at least for the commission's perspective. But certainly, with everything we will hear, will be within what we can advise the legislature on how we can move forward for the state of California. So I just want to thank you guys for what you've done to get us to this point thus far.
Sequoia, you're muted. I can't hear you.
This is Clarissa Falcon. If I can kind of make my first comments as a commissioner. Well, first of all, this is my first meeting, and I'm so glad that I joined this this roundtable discussion. First of all, I want to thank y'all for initiating this important body of work. It's a huge undertaking, but so important for these communities that have not felt whole due to infrastructure that have impacted them. And I'm looking forward to hearing from communities up and down the state on how the transportation system has impacted them. I can tell you, from the perspective of San Diego, where I'm from, that the portside communities have been very much impacted, and almost emotionally, groups have sprung up because of how transportation infrastructure has divided their communities, and it's almost an emotional one for folks, and you'll hear about that. And I just want to prepare those that are organizing these listening sessions that it is, it's very emotional for folks, and they'll tell you about how it's impacted not only their feeling of community, but how it's impacted their health and the health of their families. And so, but it's, it's a work that needs to happen in order to try to rectify, the institutional distrust that these communities have had with our transportation agencies. And these infrastructures had to, to be built, but at a cost to communities. And so glad to hear that this work is being done, because it is so important to try to, to try to mend the relationships, and hopefully to find some solutions that will help mitigate, the many years of impact that these communities and the folks that live there have experienced. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Am I back? Yay. Okay, I was wondering why everyone was ignoring me. All right. Thank you for those comments, Commissioner. And I definitely want to make sure that there's space for comments from the roundtable or question from roundtable members on this item.
I had a question. Oh, sorry. It's a little. I know I'm mad you mentioned Colton, but it wasn't on the slide. So I just kind of wanted to double check if Colton was one of the communities that was being piloting. And if so, I know that a lot of folks have kind of made really great points on like what these listening sessions and the report will do with kind of plans that are already in place from Caltrans or that will be up, right? And also because the infrastructure in Colton, I know the community is very worried about rail expansion as well. And so just kind of combining all that I've seen with working with the community in Colton, I really feel like it's a community that really does need to be listened to, but not just listened to, like actual work has to be done, right? I'm just wondering how the report that you all work on will be integrated into plans that you already have or future plans that Caltrans has and policy. And also just to double check that Colton is on. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvette.
Ahmad, do you want to respond on Colton, or is your volume not working?
I don't know.
You guys must be having some audio issues. Yvette, I just want to clarify, there were two different efforts that we were talking about, so I think that's important. The first thing that Amar was talking about was our RAISE application to do our Reconnecting Communities effort, which will be a longer effort. The listening sessions that Carolyn talked about is the effort that will take place over the next few months. And those communities have not been decided. Carolyn did share there were a number of communities that we're considering, but we haven't locked that down. So we definitely want your input, and we can add Colton to the list for consideration if that's what you're recommending.
Yeah, I just it finally let me unmute. So yeah, I don't know if the powers that be on the internet systems, but Colton is listed on the pilot project for RAISE in the efforts of reconnecting communities. So I mentioned those efforts that could coincide with our listening sessions, not necessarily be the specific communities that are identified, but also just letting folks know that there's a larger effort on the engagement practices that we're doing. So Colton does represent like the Inland Empire for the rebuilding and reconnecting communities efforts, but it's not necessarily going to be identified for listening sessions. So we're still trying to identify which groups to do there. So definitely keeping that in mind. Thank you for your comments, Yvette.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying. I thought that both would kind of coincide, so that's why I was wondering why Colton was listed in one and not the other, or how that would look like. But that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's a great opportunity to engage with different communities. Like if one is selected versus the other for the listening sessions, and it's just kind of a commitment from Caltrans that there's just a lot of efforts on how we work with our community members. I think specifically for reconnecting communities, it's going to be a different practice and process there, where there might be several listening sessions within the identified communities, really to tease out different types of paths forward on that reconnection and what it looks like for communities to reconnect.
Thank you. Okay, great. So sorry, Connor, after you, we'll have Leslie Sanders offer a comment.
Oh, go ahead. Actually, Leslie was first. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And then we'll have you comment, Connie. Thank you.
Hi. So I just wanted to follow up on a couple of items. When you're discussing potential focus areas and using geographies and populations, I just want to make sure that we're all aware that tribal populations throughout the state of California, from San Diego to Humboldt County, we all have very distinct and different transportation issues and needs. And the same, not only within the populations, but the geographies. And when we're discussing, I know Jeannie had mentioned that there's a struggle about setting the tone, not wanting to set a tone too strong, having all leadership there. And with tribal communities, we want the leadership there. We have spent the last 20 odd years talking to people within our district. And District 1 has been very, very, they are good with us. They, you know, with our tribe, with the tribe that I work for. They have been very respondent to our needs, and with some of the other tribes on the commission. However, with that said, they can listen and they take notes, and it goes nowhere. Tribes want leadership there. They're sovereign nations, and they expect, as it should be, to be treated as sovereign nations. So tribes want leadership there. And when you're doing the listening sessions, it cannot be tribes with other communities. You're going to have to acknowledge that you are going to have listening sessions with tribes separate from other communities. If you want any type of engagement, those are really, really fundamental notions that seem to kind of get lost. And those are fundamental building blocks of developing relationships with tribes. So that's the only comments I had.
Thank you, Leslie. That's super valuable. We'll take that back, and we absolutely recognize that tribes are sovereign nations and have very unique considerations, and that's really helpful. So we'll capture that.
And it's so important that you realize that Southern California tribes and Northern California tribes, we have very distinct, different transportation issues and needs. Very distinct.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. I was going to cover some of the same things too, and mention the fact that there's also a difference between just having a meeting with Indigenous people and having a meeting with tribal leadership. And you know, I also think the governor's tribal liaison's office should be invited to those meetings. And then I also was just going to emphasize the need for having the folks who are pouring their hearts out understand how to actually influence existing projects with Caltrans. Because so many times we go to these listening sessions and we talk about existing projects and there's no connection to, oh, the designs for the, you know, for those existing projects are in this stage and here's how you engage in that. And so it's a lost opportunity. We feel we don't know the difference between a listening session and actually the ability to influence design. And you know, I really got emotional about that last time because of so much of what we've been working with broadband, where it's like we give input separate, but we never actually get to talk to the design teams. And so in addition to leadership, I think it is important when you have a project that you know is impacting a community that's seeking equity, to have the staffers who are part of that team be able to come. You know, just to let everybody know, of course, after I threw an absolute fit at the last meeting, we did have a meeting and we got line staff there. They got to understand that this was an equity project because they didn't even know that it was an equity project and that we were assisting tribes. And you know, they were behind the scenes going, no, this is never going to happen. And when they heard the passion from the community, they were like, okay, and our project got approved. So I think it is important to have more than just the leadership in the meetings, have the folks so that they can explain how we can actually influence the decisions.
Thank you, Connie. Stephanie, I saw you pop up for a second. Did you have a comment as well? Okay, we'll get back to you if we need to later. Thank you very much. I want to see if there's any other roundtable comments or questions, or Commissioner. All right, thanks everyone. This is an ongoing conversation, so please feel free to reach out continually. We'll move into public comment. We have Leah Van Winkle and Sally Goodman on the line.
Thank you, Sequoia. Leah Van Winkle, you're now free to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hello. This is actually a group of residents and advocates for the Wood Street Commons in Brooklyn, and we are concerned that the Caltrans or the California Highway Patrol have given us a verbal threat of eviction of our residents in Zone 2, including Bob, Russell, and Lydia, Rover, and Kelly. Here, go ahead.
And that's just, this is the here, Joe. And that's just one example of the way that we've been under constant threat of placement and eviction at Caltrans for years and years and years. And many of us have lived on the site for over 5 years. Some have been here for almost 10 years, and constantly dealing with this uncertainty. We've tried to reach many Caltrans executives as varying degrees of success in negotiating.
Leah, I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's very, very hard to hear you. I'm wondering if you might be able to speak a little louder.
Is that better now?
Yes, thank you.
Should I start over?
Probably, yeah, it was really hard to follow.
Okay,
Hello, everybody. This is Theo Peter Jones. I'm a resident of the Wood Street Commons in Oakland, and we have an equity concern, which is that 2 of our Black residents have been threatened with eviction this Monday by Caltrans and the California Highway Patrol in Zone 2 of Wood Street. And we would like to have some engagement with Caltrans to help prevent this from happening, because this would not serve equity to have our Black residents have their homes confiscated, their property destroyed, and their lives displaced by Caltrans and the California Highway Patrol. And this is Theo Cedar Jones, and here's Leah Van Winkle.
Yeah, and that's just one example of the constant threat of displacement and eviction that residents have been under, many of whom have lived here for 5 years, 10 years. It's a long-standing encampment that's constantly in these very tense dynamics with Caltrans and CHP. And so this is just a way of exemplifying the need for unhoused voices to be represented on an equity advisory roundtable committee like this. We were really excited to see that this effort exists, and it's really easy to sweep away unhoused people with the trash that they are clearing when sites like this get displaced. But the folks living here are people too, and deserve to be heard and deserve to be like fairly represented, especially when decisions made by institutions like Caltrans so deeply and desperately and brutally and violently affect people's lives on the ground. So we are asking that some percentage of this commission be unhoused voices. We have candidates to suggest who are very reliable and consistent community organizers and representatives within this community. And we would also like for Caltrans to host a listening session here in West Oakland so that officials can come straight to this neighborhood and see what's happening on the ground and see the beautiful cooperative community that exists on this land and has been on this land for a long time. And there's a lot of beauty here, and it's time that be seen and recognized and valued. I'm with a couple others. I'm going to see if anyone else wants to speak.
Yes, my name is Tony. I've been living in by the Oakland Road for at least a year. These are some of my neighbors, people here. And I wanted to say that representation of unhoused community or landless community is one thing that is very much needed from the standpoint that if anything happens, any incident related to displacement, as the one we're facing now, it's going to happen or will happen, we'll be able to communicate to any authority, any other organization, what the whole community wants, and not just outweigh decisions or the decisions of just a few, but in a general way and in consensus. And it's also representation is also very needed when there are incidents in the other side or on the other side of the spectrum, like fires or violence or theft that is often related to people that are unhoused like us or landless. And if there is representation, there could be a communication on whether it was people that were indeed unhoused or it was someone else. Maybe it was someone else coming, and that is an influence, an external influence that should be completely clarified and not just associated or assumed. So it goes as I was saying, a full spectrum on resolving issues, outstanding issues that have being judgmental with our community and the way in general the perception that in general exists on people that are landless or unhoused. So I think it's very needed, and it would be essential for any other change to take place.
Okay, I think there's one more. My name is Lydia Blumberg, and in addition to being a resident here, I'm also the clinic director at the Cobb on Wood project, which is a sort of self-help resource center for houseless people that exist in this community. And it's a little bit down the road from the compound where I live. Normally I would speak to larger issues, but I've been absolutely traumatized since Caltrans contractors have been here for the past few weeks, bulldozing the property of myself and my neighbors, and just terrorizing us. They literally sprayed me with pesticide, herbicide. I'm not sure what it was, but I've been ill ever since then. And that was when I had to put my body in between a bulldozer and my cabin boat, which they ultimately ended up destroying a few days later when I wasn't looking. I think it's the task of this equity advisory committee to mitigate violence like this against people who are already so far scooched to the margins of society. And I'm pleading with you to allow houseless people a seat at the table. Thank you.
Thank you all. I think there will be more residents wishing to speak at the open public comment section later in the meeting, but that's all for right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that to light here in this space. And we absolutely, it's very important to follow up and have a meeting outside of this space with you. So we'll be following up. We have your contact info. Again, thank you for sharing that.
Sequoia, can I jump in to respond to that? I wanted to, well, first of all, thank you, Leah, Theo, Tony, and Lydia for your comments and sharing your experiences. I wanted to respond to your comments about including unhoused individuals on our equity bodies. And then after I do that, I would like to also give Caltrans a chance to respond if they would like to some of the other topics raised. And so last year, when we were developing this equity advisory roundtable, our commission indicated that it was important to them to feature affordable housing and homelessness knowledge and experience on this roundtable body, in addition to a number of other areas. In putting together the roundtable, we invited Ruby Acevedo, who is our affordable housing representative for this body. But we did not secure an individual who was unhoused or could speak to homelessness. And that is something that is a limitation of the group that we put together. We had started this effort with 19 individuals. Equity is a very broad topic with a number of really important issues. We had not planned on adding any members to the Equity Advisory Roundtable because this effort is pretty well underway. But what I did want to offer is that our next agenda item is on the development of our permanent Equity Advisory Committee, and I think it will be really important for all of us to consider that perspective in informing that standing body. And so maybe that's a conversation that we can continue in this meeting and future meetings. So I just wanted to offer that, and maybe I'll turn it over to Jeannie to see if there's anything that she would like to add.
Yeah, Bridget, I think, we're very aware of the Wood Street encampment and the challenges there. And it's a incredibly challenging situation, I think, on all fronts, and want to just appreciate and recognize the folks that called in and the challenges that they face every day living in the conditions that they are. In terms of the specific items, I'd really like to defer to my colleagues in the district, and I did just send a note to our district director in District 4. It's really, her responsibility to work with the City of Oakland, County of Alameda, to engage with the continuums of care and provide better long-term service and options for the individuals living under a freeway facility there. It's not a safe situation for anyone, including the folks using the infrastructure as well as the folks living there. So totally recognize that, but I'd really like to defer to the district and take the discussion of the specific issues offline with the district, because they have been engaging directly, and it's really their responsibility being there on the ground to work with the local city and county to resolve the issues of the long term. And there's not great options in Oakland, as we all know, in terms of availability of housing for folks to go into. So it's a really complex challenge, and not one that we at Caltrans alone can solve. Certainly not one that I think CTC can solve. So I hope that we can work with our partners that do have those resources and the ability to work in partnership with us to find long-term solutions, and not make this simply a transportation agency issue to discuss. So I think that's probably the best way forward. Happy to have more discussion with you all on this and with the folks that called in. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we really invite the participation and are open to ongoing dialogue and conversation on this topic. And are there any other public comments on this item?
Yes, Sequoia, I wanted to read off a quick question that came from an earlier comment from Sally Goodman. She asked, where will the charter be posted online?
I can go ahead and provide a response to that. So we are planning to post the charter on the Commission's website, which is catc.ca.gov. We have under the programs section a web page for equity and public engagement. And below that, we have a web page on the Equity Advisory Roundtable where the charter will be posted. But also I can follow up directly to make sure that Sally gets the charter.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Sequoia, really quick, I wanted to read off just a quick response from Leah. She just wanted to say thank you for your acknowledgement of the situation. The group has been in direct communication with the district, and it's not been easy or fruitful. We acknowledge the need for district collaboration, but we are deeply asking that you also step up and support to the state level. This is not a local issue. We are part of Solidarity Coalition that is bringing together Caltrans-based encampments across the state, and the policies that Caltrans of the state sets have implications for every district in the state. Thank you. And that concludes all public comment that I see at this time.
Yeah, thanks everyone for all of that. So we also have Chair Norton on the line, finalizing tab 5 and returning back to welcoming remarks. Chair Norton, did you want to offer a few quick remarks on reflections from previous meetings now that you've been able to join us?
Right now, I think because I'm still driving and listening, I'd much rather give some remarks in public comment after the panel on item 6.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. And thanks, Amar, for reminding me. Are there any comments on the Spanish interpretation line?
Yes, Ms. Sequoia, no comments on the Spanish line.
Okay, thank you.
One moment, please. Let me ask one more time.
Okay.
Sorry, no, none at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and quickly, we did have one comment that we apologize for missing in the chat regarding the charter. And Bridget, will you review that comment?
Yeah, I believe that was about where the charter will be posted. So that will be on the Commission's Equity Advisory Roundtable webpage.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I think we're all caught up. And now I want to move on. We're going to have a quick 5-minute break before we start on tab 6. So it's 2:29 now. We'll reconvene at 2:34. Thanks everyone so far, and we look forward to an engaging discussion to follow. All right. Sorry for such a short break. We definitely want to leave lots of opportunity for our panel discussion to get going. So welcome back, everyone. We'll move on now to tab 6, the panel discussion and presentation. We'll start with a short slideshow from Amar Sid, Avital Barnea, and I, giving a little bit more background as to what we're doing around the interagency advisory committees and interagency equity efforts. And they'll follow it up with an in-depth panel discussion featuring the expertise of our roundtable members and a special guest. Next slide, please. All right, so a little bit of background on our interagency equity coordination so far between the California State Transportation Agency, the CTC, and Caltrans. And again, featuring Sequoia, Avital, and Amar. Next slide, please. So this is from our charter highlighting sort of why we've at the CTC wanted to put together a roundtable. So the purpose of an equity advisory roundtable is to identify inequities in transportation, recommend solutions to mitigate disparate impacts, and elevate diverse and valuable perspectives in the transportation process. Our goals for the roundtable and future advisory committees is to support safe, affordable, reliable, efficient, and dignified transportation for under-resourced communities throughout the state. Next slide, please. Topics that we would like to see being held by the roundtable or future advisory committees include suggestions for topics to feature at public meetings of the commission, including joint meetings between CARB and HCD, proposed revisions to our planning and programming guides, and recommendations for how the commission can implement its racial equity statement, which can be found at this website listed below. Next slide, please. And finally, for our advisory roundtable plan, the scope of it is to really incorporate best practice for meaningful engagement into the commission's meeting and guidelines, improve pathways for communities to participate in and influence transportation planning and decision-making processes, to support the development of community listening sessions, which we just heard from, in partnership with Caltrans and CalSTA, and support the development of an equity advisory committee. And I'll pass it on to Avital now. Next slide, please, sorry.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. So you may recall in 2019 and 2020, Governor Newsom signed 2 executive orders on climate change, and those both focused on how transportation is the largest contributor to statewide greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that in order to mitigate the impacts of climate change, we're going to have to tackle what we do in the transportation sector. So those executive orders directed us here at CalSTA to create a holistic framework to leverage the more than $5 billion that we oversee in state transportation spending annually to align with the state's climate, health, and social equity goals. So we worked for about 1.5 years to develop this Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, or CAPTI, as we're calling it, which now contains a suite of proposed actions that are in 7 strategy areas concerning transportation planning, programming, and mitigation activities. And we were really conscious to make sure that these approaches consider needs of the entire state and all areas of the state, rural, urban, tribal, all communities. We want to make sure that we have a balanced approach. So through all of this work, we did a lot of stakeholder outreach in this process. we're really pleased that we were able to finalize this plan in July 2021. Next slide, please. So I want to focus, I mentioned there were 7 strategy areas. I want to focus on the 3rd strategy area, which is elevate community voices in how we plan and fund transportation projects. And there are a few actions that are listed under this strategy, but the one that we're going to focus on today is the first action, which is to establish transportation equity and environmental advisory committees, or singular, or one committee. And what CAPTI is directing us to do with this Equity Advisory Committee is to create a more transparent transportation planning process, to use this committee to also coordinate across state agencies, to develop standards and practices for meaningful engagement. And of course, this Transportation Equity Advisory Committee will be built off of some of the existing equity efforts that are already occurring, such as this roundtable that you're all participating in, as well as Caltrans community listening sessions, which you heard about earlier today. So we envision that this Transportation Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Committee will provide technical assistance and resources to those most impacted by transportation projects. And again, we want to make sure that we are working with and responding to the most disadvantaged communities, and that includes low-income communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities all across the state of California. So this effort is in coordination with several different agencies. At CalSTA, we are working with Caltrans, CTC, as well as the California Air Resources Board, the Housing and Community Development Department, and the Strategic Growth Council to establish this advisory committee or committees and follow through on how they are recommended in CAPTI. And with that, I will turn it over to Amar. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Avital. So just kind of following up, and this is going to be really quickly so we can jump into our panel session, but over the development of this Equity Advisory Committee, the last 6 weeks, our 3 agencies have been engaging and trying to coordinate around what this looks like, how our EAC members would come into play, what they would be doing, how they would inform all of our programs, processes. And so from a Caltrans perspective, looking at how the development of an EAC came from CAPTI, or looking at what's called out in CAPTI, there's a lot of surrounding of inclusive communities. There's space around anti-displacement in a lot of our work. And so when we're looking at the EAC, there's an opportunity to look at our programs, identify which programs could be better developed, redeveloped, how we fund different types of projects. I have a whole list of transportation projects here and acronyms that might not mean a lot of things to people, but there's a lot of dollar amounts between these state funded programs that we can take into consideration. I have the Equity Index pilot project that we're working on, which will be presented in an upcoming roundtable, which really looks at transportation indicators when we're kind of looking at a space to identify our communities and how transportation impacts communities. That development is in process, but this could be a space where our EAC help further weigh in on the indicators that we're developing, that we're selecting, and then also in a revise or an update for a 2.0 and how this may be used across all state transportation programs. Also an opportunity to look at some of our findings within the listening sessions, incorporating those findings into policy and practice, looking at and reviewing guidelines and guidance and guidebooks from the Reconnecting Communities program. And then also, again, that anti-displacement strategy listed in CAPTI, like how that reflects into our transportation funding and that commitment that has been made from the governor's office. So I'll go ahead and pause there, and then we can hand this off to Naila so we can engage in the this roundtable discussion or panelist discussion about EAC.
Thank you so much, Amar. So today we're going to be having a panel discussion with roundtable members and also special guests. And the goals of this panel discussion is to highlight strategy areas to focus on in developing an equity advisory committee, talk about best practices, and also share some experiences from folks who have created these equity advisory committees or served on these type of committees. As our transportation agencies are embarking on this, we want to make sure that we're showing support. This can be a tough and challenging issue to move forward. And so we really hope that this panel can help inform those decisions as they're being made. We are about 45 minutes off schedule. And so I am moderating this panel. It is my job as moderator to make sure that I create a safe space for our panelists, but also move us through. So if I cut you off, know that it is with nothing but love. I will give the Goldilocks recommendation. Goldilocks is problematic, but let's not take too much time. Let's not be too short. Take just the right amount of time. Also, because we are a little bit off, one of our panelists, Tamika Butler, is going to have to sign off early. So I'm actually going to pass it to her now to give comments at the top, just in regards to showing support for equity advisory committees and sharing some experience. Tamika, I'm going to pass it to you and give you a few 2-3 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, I'm sorry I can't join this panel. It has a few of my favorite folks on it. And I know they will hold it down. But I just wanted to say that I think the fact that we're having these conversations are really important. And to a point someone made earlier, I think we also have to figure out how we get beyond the conversations and really enact action. And as we have these conversations and as we have these advisors, whether or not they are experts like we are or community members, though I would often those folks are one and the same. Some of us have had the privilege and the access to be anointed as experts, but our community members are also experts. I would hope that we figure out ways to value their time, to value their efforts, and frankly, follow up and let folks know how their time and efforts have helped us, have moved us. And even if we can't make the changes or the decisions that they ultimately want us to make, I hope we're able to at least approach those conversations honestly, vulnerably, and with authentic openness to hearing what we do wrong and what we do well, and not think about it as folks are going to be really upset and I hope we can receive it, but instead folks have been deeply impacted by the way that transportation has divided them and really harmed their lives. And I hope we can approach those situations with staff capacity and with the support and with the compassion to hear where folks are and hold space for them, not just hear them rant or hear them complain and view it that way. And then the last thing I'll just say is I know some of these things are hard. A lot of things with the state are hard because there are always lawyers involved. As a former lawyer, I understand that. And I think one of the main things we always hear is Prop 209 really gets in the way of being able to think about diversity. And what I would offer is, there are laws and they do make things definitely more difficult. You do have to be more strategic. But the reality is, if you care about something, if you invest in something, and if you go to folks, whether or not they're folks of color, whether or not they are indigenous folks, Black folks, other folks of color, whether or not they are queer folks, folks with disability, our older adults and our elders, when you go to them before you need something and you build real relationships with them, then often they can be your partners in figuring out these hard things, right? And so rather than just throwing your hands up and saying, we want more diverse people and we don't know how to find them and we don't know if we'll get them, we have to start truly believing that these folks have the answers, that these folks are committed, but they're not idiots. So they know when they're being used, they know when they're being placated. And so we have to do everything in our power to really make sure that we're forming relationships. It might be scary if you're white to be the only person at the Black person's barbecue, but we do it every day when we show up in these spaces. And so how can you share power and how can you really make sure that you are meeting people where they are, metaphorically and practically, treating them as the experts that they are, and not only going to them when you need something, but going to them as partners, as co-conspirators, and as folks you trust, who they can trust you, and valuing their expertise. So with that, again, I'm so sorry that I have to jump, but this is a great panel, and I'm excited for everybody to hear what's ahead of them.
Thank you so much. All right, all right. So Tamika, feel free to stay on if you can. I know you have a hard stop at 3, but if you can hop in, we greatly value your input. So also moving forward, let's see. I want to first introduce some roundtable panelists, but let me introduce myself first. I'm Naila Poe-Pardon, and I'm the Executive Director at Climate Plan. I am you'll hear my 2-year-old son in the background. He is the real boss around here. But I am extremely excited to be facilitating this panel today, and extremely excited and honored to be serving on the roundtable itself. When I think about equity, you know, I'll use my son as an example. He's 2.5, and I think about how important mobility is and movement is for him. We went through the crawling stage, the walking stage. We now run and jump and climb on everything. And mobility and freedom of moving his body is so at the core of who he is right now. And I think it's so at the core for all of us, and so at the core for so many of our communities. And to be able to have a say in how we move our bodies, how we get around, how we connect to others is so important. And for a lot of our communities that have been shut out, this is really an opportunity to right that wrong, and at least give them a say. I know for thinking of my 2-year-old, he definitely always wants a say on how his body moves and where it can go. So let me introduce the panelists that we have. And I'm going to introduce all 3, and then I'm going to ask them the question, what does equity mean to them? What does equity and transportation mean to them? And how do they envision an equity advisory committee addressing some of these issues? So on our panel today, we have Jane Clough, who is the Senior Regional Planner and Tribal Liaison with the San Diego Association of Governments. We have Randy Torres Van Vleck. Did I say that right, Randy? I hope so. Director of Policy and Planning at City Heights CDC in the San Diego area. And we also have Rio Oshas, who is the founder of RAHOK. Did I say it right, Rio? Feel free to correct. There we go. All 3 of these folks have tremendous wealth of knowledge around equity advisory committees and forming them, being on them, participating, working with them. I'm going to pass it first to Jane to talk about, why is equity advisory committee so important?
There we go. Sorry, I just realized that I was on mute. It's absolutely fundamental to have community members from EJ communities in the mix and representing their geographies to support the decision-making process and making sure that their communities understand, you know, I'm working at a regional level. So, you know, working on a long-range plan is very complicated. It's long range, so people are more worried about whether they've got a bus stop, you know, that's accessible to them, that they can get to work, or, you know, whatever means of mobility they need. So they trying to express that to communities and really get their input in a way that's going to be effective for them and is going to get to where it needs to go to the decision makers is absolutely critical.
Thank you. Randy, your thoughts on how do you define equity in transportation, and how do you envision an equity advisory committee helping?
Thank you, Naila, and it's an honor to serve on this roundtable, to be here in the panel with everyone. Appreciate this conversation, and you know, the role of the equity advisory committees is immense. I think that they can play a big role in shifting power and influencing decision-making, policy-making in a way that can benefit communities that have historically been harmed through decision-making, and can really help achieve, I think, health, equity, and justice. For City 8 CDC, where I work, we're a nonprofit based in San Diego. We have spent some time defining equity because we do think that is an important part of it. And the way we define it is justice achieved on the basis of social need, recognizes and identifies unfair systemic treatment of certain groups, whether it's racial, socioeconomic, or geographic, and that it executes action and advocacy in response. And that really, I think, ties in tightly to transportation, where we know that transportation is made through policy making, it's made through leaders in power, and that it's something that we see every day in the built environment. It leads to the air that we breathe, leads to whether or not our community has parks or not, and whether we're living in healthy, sustainable land uses. So it's a big part of it. So thanks for that question.
Thank you, Randy. And Rio, we'd love to hear your thoughts on defining equity in transportation and how an equity advisory committee can help.
Thank you so much, Naila, for having me, and to the panelists. Thank you all, and thanks, Amika. It's always wonderful to hear you speak, and it's a pleasure to be here with everybody. Good afternoon. Equity, I definitely want to build off what Jane and Randy and Tamika have spoken already, and add that for me, equity is also a point, it's a transitionary point. And the transitionary point that equity is being used in is absolutely to uplift folks who have been invisibilized, who have been marginalized. I definitely got to hear from a lot of the audience members who, are houseless, and thinking about communities like that, thinking about BIPOC communities, thinking about tribal nations, absolutely. But it's a transitionary word, because I really believe that equity is a stepping stone to really living a full, dignified, loving world that's going to not only protect all humans, but also our planet. Our planet is in dire need, and often when we think about equity, we're thinking about the people, which is absolutely powerful and important, but we're going to have to think about the people with the ecosystems. And a lot of actually our local tribal nations have those examples embedded for 10,000 years. So when I think about equity, I think about a transitionary time when government and other public agencies are trying to wrap their minds around it and really expand into this change that we might not even be able to see right now, but hopefully one that's going to be incredible and healthy for all of us.
Thank you, Ria. Thank you so much. So the first question I'm going to pass to Jane. And you've done a lot of work working with tribal communities and communities in San Diego around building equity advisory committees. Can you do us a favor, take a few minutes and paint the picture? How do you form them? How are they funded? What do they look like? Really walk us through and paint the picture, but walk us through in about 5 minutes if you can. I hate to have to rush you.
Oh my. Well, let's put it this way. The government-to-government framework that we have with the tribal nations in this region took a lot longer than 5 minutes. But yeah, so I want to step back to Leslie Sanders' reference to the fact that there are Native American populations that are in the BIPOC grouping, right? They're in citizens that live in a particular place, and then you have tribal nations who are sovereign and have land and or don't have land, because they're California tribes that lost their land and it was taken violently away from them, and so that diplomatic planning relationship is different than working in specific communities. So just wanted to touch just a little bit on 1 minute on the tribal relationship, because that's a whole long thing. But SANDAG almost 20 years ago developed a government-to-government relationship with the Southern California Tribal Chairman's Association as an intertribal council. So looking at it from a diplomatic perspective, we're a council of governments, they're a council of governments, and then developed a policy and framework and a practical framework, because one of the key things that we've been talking about and I've heard so much is trust. How do you build trust? And then where do you go from dialogue to action? And so this is like a constant iterative, sorry, I use my hands a lot, a constant iterative piece that we need to have collaborative strategies, but then we also have to make sure that we've put projects in place that we're actually doing things and making and accomplishing things. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done at SANDAG over the years, and how it's intensified to the point where we were able to do, because of that trust, we were able to do essentially a tribal regional transportation plan, a long range plan, thinking about the tribes in the region together. There, each of them works on their own plan, but then how do we see the connections between all of them, and how do they connect to the transportation system in the region, and make sure that we're looking at those projects. But going back to working with environmental justice communities and building a framework for a social equity partnership framework with the community-based organizations around the region. It has been a process. So in each regional plan, it's been iterative. Each regional plan, we've tried things, saw how it worked, done a reflection afterwards, and from that reflection with the community-based organizations, made changes the next iteration. So each time we're getting stronger and bigger, and huge pieces of this are having a long-term relationship. And as we're developing each iteration, we've done an RFP, a request for proposals, right? And made sure that we had, went far and wide looking for the organizations that have the respect of their community, that have the capacity to be a liaison from their community to the planning process, which is no small feat, as Randy has discovered over the years, and has evolved. The work that City Heights CDC has done over the years is best practices, and should be nationally looked at as a mechanism for how community-based organizations literally need to become planning organizations, or have a planning unit in them, to be able to make those connections and to do the research that needs to be done, to make sure that those articulations really it's not just complaining about things, but actually looking at the plan and then saying, hey, you missed this, you missed that, this needs to happen, and formulating those proposals in a way that can actually get into the system and to the decision makers. But going back to sort of the CBO's capacity to convene, and the institutional capacity, and having staff that reflect the demographics of their community, right? So a lot of times you might have community-based organizations, there's service organizations, and they're great, but they may or may not actually reflect the communities that they're working in. So, and it's a bit of an anthropological study as well, because we need to make sure it's not just people applying, it's also making sure that the community respects those organizations, and that they're really going to be able to bring people to the table and be that bridge, right? So each iteration, we've done these the RFPs and developed the networks, and the networks over time have changed in sort of what their roles have been. Obviously, outreach, education. One of the things that we always do is it's the timing of when this happens as well, so that that we get them on board long before we even start the PIP, the public involvement plan, for the regional plan, so that they can be involved in co-creating what does outreach look like, and how do we do this, and what the hell is a regional plan, right?
Thank you, Jane. I'm gonna have to cut you there, because I want to let me give a public announcement. Because we're doing this so quick, I want to make sure every word is heard. So if you're not speaking, please mute. Second, I want to, do any panelists want to hop in, or me too? Anything that Jane said? Any additional thoughts?
Can I just like finish a little, just add a little bit to wrap it up? Is that that from this network, is it okay? Yes, okay, you can hear me. Okay, that this network, it's about a long-term commitment with the network, and it's not just here's some money. Oh, well, here's a big piece, right? Is investing in the community-based organizations so that they can do their work, and making sure that the contract and the way that it's funded is not onerous on them, that they get the time to do their work instead of spending too much time doing complicated reports and so forth. They're the experts. They know what they need to do in their community, but we need to give them time to figure out that strategy. They first have to figure out what the regional plan is, then how they can engage their community, what they're going to do with it, and their funding is it's whatever they need. So they decide how they want to use it, and how they want to dedicate it, and then we meet on a monthly basis. We have at the moment 2 pieces. One is that they form a public forum for engagement on the development of the regional plan, where others can engage in that conversation in a public forum. And then they meet as outreach and advocate experts to talk about the methodologies, about how do we get to our people, what do we need to know, what are some of the information that we need to understand so we can talk to our community, and then bring that input back to the forum. So yeah, it's hard to do it in 5 minutes, but there you go.
No, and honestly, that point about making sure that we're not overburdening is a point that we need to make sure it's shouted from the rooftops.
Yes.
Randy or Ria, do you guys want to me too anything that was said? All right. Okay, so next question is going to be directed at Randy. We're doing a bit of a shift because Tamika was going next. Hold on, give me a second, guys. There we go. All right. So Randy, you've sat on advisory panels and advisory committees, and so you have a lot of experience that we'd love to talk about. And in your introduction, you also mentioned power sharing. And I mean, in full transparency, I walk through this world. I mean, it's not even transparent, it's pretty obvious. I walk through this world as a Black woman. One of the things I notice is when I'm sitting on advisory committees, if I say something and a white male counterpart says the exact same thing, you know, the reception is completely different. So Randy, it would be great to talk about like how power sharing can happen at these committees, how privileged groups or groups with less privilege can work together to really advance like common goals around equity.
Thank you, Naila, and thanks for your willingness to share your experience. It's extremely frustrating that you have experienced that. As a society, I think we have a lot of work to do to identify how white supremacy and racism shows up and how we confront it. And we know it shows up in many ways, from microaggressions to certain public policy decisions, land use and physical harm of and oppression of Black and brown communities. So I think talking about racism and white supremacy is a crucial step, but ultimately talking isn't enough. We need action and accountability. And as a white man, I try my best to recognize my positionality. And as someone who's benefited from white privilege and male privilege, and because I have the privilege to work in spaces of power like this one here and other advisory committees, I try my best to confront white supremacy personally and directly. That may mean conversations on the spot or one-on-one conversations later on with someone. But the ultimate guiding question that I put out there for myself is, am I using my positionality in my community, in this office, in my work capacity, in my personal capacity, and on this committee to be an ally, to carry out anti-racist actions that lead to equity? And again, it's a lifelong guiding question and commitment that needs to be approached with urgency. I think that in regards to how committees can work together to achieve equity, one of the ways that we, as a City Hate CDC as an organization, the way that we approach, whether or not to serve on a committee is kind of like through 2 different prongs. One is, are there resources there to support our time, to invest in that and really put the time and the energy to do the research, to show up prepared, that to compensate us for the time that these committees take, right? And we know that they do take time and they should take time in order to be effective. And then 2 is are the committees set up in a way for power to be realized, right? Do we have the ability as a committee to influence decision making? I think power, can be a scary word to some, but really the way we see it is another way to say influence. Does this committee have the influence to carry out the mission that our organization has, that our community needs? Are we able to, through the participation in this committee, achieve the policy systems, environmental change that we need? So that's essential. I think that some committees have the ability to identify like potential legislation that can be used to address inequitable power structures and systems. One example is City Heights CDC. We recognized several years ago at Sandag, when it was a different agency, that the decisions were being made in a way that we don't feel was equitable, that there were a lot of freeway expansions in some of the most polluted communities. And it felt like suburban communities voting for infrastructure in urban communities. And so when we looked at the power structure of Sandag at the board level, we did an analysis and we looked at, okay, what of the 18 cities and jurisdictions have the most power based on this tally system, where a city that had 2,000 people in it had one vote, and the city that had millions of people in it had 2 votes. And so we actually did an analysis that looked at the tally structure, and we found that that it was very inequitable. For example, the city of Del Mar had the residents of Del Mar city had 160 times more voting power per capita than residents in the city of San Diego. And if you look at in racial justice analysis, apply that lens there, the city of Del Mar is about 84% white, pretty wealthy as well. And San Diego, where I live and where I work, a home to many environmental justice communities like Barrio Logan, City Heights, Southeast. Our city of San Diego is 57% people of color, 43% white. And yet the city of Del Mar had as I mentioned, 60 times more voting power per capita. So we got legislation, worked with Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez to change that. Assembly Bill 805, AB 805, that changed the power structure at Sandag at the board level. And since then, we've seen a lot of change that's brought in new leadership. That bill was signed by the governor, luckily. It's been a completely different agency ever since. I feel like the agency is really led with equity. It's helped delegate power to a group there called the Social Equity Working Group. We're one of the most influential working groups at Sandag. Just recently, there was a subcommittee formed called the Transit Pilot Equity Working Group, and we're looking at how to spend about $10 million in the near term on projects that can go directly to our communities to address like transit needs, whether it's overnight transit, a youth opportunity bus passes. So those are just some ways I think that as examples of what power can look like and how we've helped achieve that. Thanks for that question, Ayla.
No problem. Thank you, Randy. And that actually goes right into what I was going to ask Rio. Because Rio, I know you've sat on a lot of committees as well. And I know we've had many conversations offline where I think we both have had experiences of being on performative committees, feeling powerless or demoralized by committees that aren't able to influence, as Randy used. People are often uncomfortable with the idea of power, so committees that can't influence. So Rio, how would you let me actually do a little bit more framing. We're trying to shift the paradigm here, right? Like, we understand that these voices have been excluded for a long time, and including them is in many ways a paradigm shift and can be difficult. And that can lead to, just a lot of ego, frustration all around. So Rio, what would you say is the way that agencies should respond to community voices as they're engaging in equity advisory committees?
Yeah, definitely have been in a numerous advisory committees where I felt absolutely powerless, frustrated, and to the point where it felt systemic. It felt like these committees were almost set up as a way to just puppeteer the idea of equity or the idea of community voice. And there is evidence, historically speaking, which that's a very long thing, but you can look for it. There's evidence out there. And I think about actually a lot of the Black Panther movement in a lot of the ways that they have. So I just want to thank first all those leaders too, because I'm thinking about them, and I'm thinking about the way in which actually nonprofits and a lot of these committees came from that movement in time immemorial, and a lot of those committees have become ways to really actually siphon and control the community voices, right? Like, hey, if you're gonna say something you need, it has to be this in this very contrived, manipulated place that's considered an advisory, right? And that key word, like I'm already having initial like, oh no, equity advisory committee, oh that's terrible, right? That word right there is gonna need to change. It's gonna have to be something different, because we cannot simply be advising. We're talking about leading. It's almost like equity leading committee. I would change it to, and that all the decision makers would fall behind. And there would need to be actual real voting powers for that commission that's being created. And the voting power to me would seem equal. It wouldn't be, to Randy's point, this 1 to 60 paradigm that keeps happening even through our quote unquote representative democracy, right? Like it actually means we have to change the decision making powers, be it through actual power, So yeah, I definitely want to egg on how Randy did the work in San Diego, but we're going to have to do that with this committee, and I'm going to call it an equity leadership committee because that's what it really needs to be. And it's dire. It's about a matter of life or death. Like the fact that we have folks from the 710 freeway here desperately calling in and sharing their concerns. It is a matter of death or life, and that's what people are not understanding. When people's homes are being ripped up because there's another freeway being set up, it reduces people's lifespan. That amount of stress to be dislocated. It also increases people's levels of heart-related diseases. It's really interconnected. So we're really going to have to think about this differently. And I really hope that the equity piece is, again, as I talked about it earlier, it's a framework to get all the ideas and massage it into something incredible. And that's how I really see it. Because for so long, to your point, Aila, we haven't even been at the table. We haven't even sat there. I remember I started doing what would be called well, it wasn't called that then, but transportation advocacy work back in 2002. And I remember the rooms when I was sitting in various urban planning spaces or DOTs or safe routes to school or what have you, Vision Zero, all that stuff has changed so many of the faces, which I think is powerful, but we're going to have to actionable it. And so for me, like thinking about who's listening to the equity leading committee, it's going to be a humbling experience to receive this. And it's going to have to come with even perhaps training on, and I don't mean this in a facetious way, but I mean in an authentic way. Like people, we all need to be trained in active listening. Like what does active listening mean? And then how do you actively incorporate that, right? And that's what I have seen a lot, is that people are not even listening. They're not hearing the harm, the very harm and the very trauma that our communities have suffered. And it's like, actually, it's 5 million that it's going to cost us if we do that. And we're saying, yeah, but you're going to kill our people, or you're going to shorten our time span, or you're going to endanger our people in these variety of ways. So I really think like people need to be taught to do full, active, open heart listening, to actually gather it, and then to like sit with it, with the discomfort. Like you have to sit with it. And because one of the things I have seen in advisory committees is people want to jump to solutions, but that's actually not appropriate. You actually have to sit with it. You have to simmer with it, meditate with it. It's not about guilt. It's not about shame. It's not about blaming. The past has happened. The past has happened, but we do now, and how we move forward is what's really important. And I think part of it is also going to be actually
Rio, this is your final thought, so I can open it up to everyone.
And the last thing I wanted to say was that it's going to have to, it's going to have to take that we dismantle this idea that, oh, we can't do it because of bureaucracy. That doesn't exist. That is a facade. Humans created bureaucracy. It's not a little machine that it's by itself. It can be undone. And I think I really want to push any decision makers to not say like, oh, we can't do it because of this red tape. That the red tape is an illusion. And we really have to fight against that idea. So I'll leave it at that. But thank you all.
Yeah. I appreciate all of your guys' input so far, and I'm going to give us an opportunity to give like final thoughts for everyone, and then I want to open it up to all the roundtable members, because the wealth of knowledge around this does not just end with the folks on this panel, but all of the roundtable members. But I do want to say there's one thing that pops in my head. I was an organizer for 12 years, and this idea that power is finite, that influence is finite, that there's only so much of it that we have to hold on to, that by creating an equity advisory committee, we are taking away from other groups when really we're just adding to. So I would love for Jane, Randy, Rio, is the feedback me? Oh, no.
Sorry,
Jane,
I'm gonna jump in really quick. Somebody is on the phone that has called in and is unmuted, and your mic has a lot of feedback. So we'd really appreciate anyone who's on the phone right now, check your mic, please, because it's really it's really loud. Thank you.
Gotcha. Randy, Jane, Rio, any last thoughts before I open it up to the rest of the roundtable members?
I would just say that that it's, you know, it's a pleasure to have been under the radar for so many years, trying to revolutionize from inside and set up this network, and now see, you know, now that equity is everywhere, all the agencies are starting to open up and understand what they need to do. But I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the structure to make it possible at the local level. You know, and funding being a big piece of it, right? You know, we look for funding in different places, but it's not easy, and I think that there's a lot that the state can do to facilitate that.
Yeah, I can add one more thing that, you know, as also, you know, people are being hired to run places like this, and I'm thinking specifically about a lot of like, particularly women of color, people of color, and queer trans folks of color who get hired into positions of like, you know, race and equity leadership. It's really important that if you are hiring folks from the community, that you really trust them, that you really, really trust them, because you really have no idea the impact that it have. So you please do trust them, and trust that when they're advocating for the most vulnerable communities, the entire planet will benefit in all of humanity, and that means your own communities, even if they're the wealthy communities. Like, we all have nothing but to gain. So I just really hope that I can impart that trust piece.
Yeah, and I'd love to just build. Oh yeah, thanks, Nayla. I'd love to build on Rio's comment as well. I think that that, you know, the new positions that have been created are really powerful. But I think also having like the support throughout the entire administration, throughout the entire agency is going to be absolutely critical. And figuring out too, like the link between community-based organizations that are working with residents or just trying to get across the street safely. How does that translate to state level decision making, right? How does that translate to what's being the decision making that's going on at the different Caltrans districts? So it's going to take time to figure that out. So just recognizing that it's going to take that time, but I think the commitment to really figuring that out is going to be key. And again, you know, this is going to be a long journey. I think. I don't think it's going to be over at some point, right? I think it's an ongoing commitment to achieve equity. And so, yeah, having the support from the top, the middle, everyone throughout the agency is going to be critical. So thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you guys so much. I'm going to take the last couple of minutes to commend the CTC, Caltrans, and CalSTA for engaging in these conversations, the work that the agencies have been doing to move forward. When talking about this panel, if you know me, you know I love an analogy. So here we go. Equity is like walking up a hill. And the higher you walk, the more the incline hurts. You get tired, your bones ache, you want to stop, but you just have to keep walking. And honestly, the higher you get, the more you're doing it, the worse it feels on your body. And so while like the statements were a first step from the agencies, it was great, right? The staff training with GARE and on racial equity, great, we're moving. And as we move, it starts to hurt a little bit. We implemented a roundtable. The roundtable's pushed back a lot. It's hurting, we can feel the burn. And so we just have to keep trudging up this hill and understanding that each step is actually gonna be probably more painful than the last. But at the end, we'll have nice, beautiful sculpted transportation bodies. That's the goal, right? So I'm gonna pass it back to Sequoia and also open it up to all of the other roundtable members in case they wanna come on video, unmute themselves, participate, add comments in any way.
Yeah, thank you, Naila. Thanks, panelists, and sorry for the time crunch. Definitely want to hear from other roundtable members at this point. And feel free to just turn on your video and audio. Okay. Do our panelists have any other remarks to add?
I have a remark. If you have, if it's appropriate, if everybody else has gotten to speak from that roundtable, is that? I'd like to say, first of all, that I've been listening to all of the equity roundtable meetings, and I was sorry to have missed this one until midway, but I was at the 30th anniversary of Mark Ridley Thomas, former senator and assembly member, his event for his life. And I started working for him in South LA back when he started in 1991 and after the civil disturbance in 1992. I like Naila's analogy about the difficulty of going up, and the air is just a little thinner, but I think we do really achieve something together, but trust is so important. And I think that what has been wonderful about this experience is, you're right, the conversations are going to be real, they're going to be raw, but they're going to be really important. And I think as we're looking at state and federal funding with the Justice 40 initiative, that we can't just put dollars in communities without putting the structure of leadership within the communities, and to work together on how leadership and outcomes that are positive within the communities, not just over the top of the communities, happens. And what I'm excited about with the CTC members and everyone on this roundtable is that you have people here who really want to dig deep and do the hard work and do the deep listening. And I'm just so pleased that people that I have known and worked with for many, many years are here talking about how we're all coming at this from different directions, but there is a trust in this circle, and that there's going to keep being that as we start building up that leadership. I'm looking forward also to Caltrans presenting the listening sessions plan at our October meeting, because we are very, very interested in talking about how that works with all the work we're all doing. But I just want to thank you all for the time that you've taken to continue to be educators, to show your work, and to talk about the ways in which you think that things need to change and what has to happen in order to see change and have that change feel real. And I'm just glad that I'm one of 7 members of our commission who are here and have been here in these meetings, because you and your perspectives are so important, and we take them as such. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Norton. Leslie and Stephanie, I see you've popped up. Would you like to add?
This is Stephanie. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I just figured out because well, I always have issues with unmuting myself, apparently. Thank you to everyone. I think it was such a great, I think, way to end, you know, a long chunk of time to be together. And I think a lot of the times these conversations, and we've acknowledged them, right? It takes a lot of us for the metaphors that were shared. Sometimes it takes an emotional, mental, physical toll, right? There's like some moments where we're discussing some things, and I know, like for me, my cortisol levels are going up, and so I need to take deep breaths and do what I need to do to regulate my emotions, right? And I think one of the things that I'm, came out of it and like where my ears perked up is, Rio talking about how, bureaucracy is something that is like human created, right? It doesn't like exist in nature. And I had a professor one talk about, and I don't know if I've shared this before, but like all of this is like made up, right? Like white supremacy is made up. Like all these things of how we've designated that one race is better, and these are all the different attributes of why they're different. All of it has been made up, and so I remember her saying, it's one of the things that it's really heavy, because what's not made up is the real ramifications that people feel in their daily lives. That is very real, right? People dying on our streets, can't afford to live somewhere, the lack of opportunities of transportation, those things are really real. And so I think for me, the optimism here is that, we're talking about it, but I think there is a willingness to do something about it. I will say the one thing I will caution, because I've heard, I think I've heard it, is, that we want so much in some ways to design these structures and processes, I think, that still uphold bureaucracy in some way and like make it easier for people to navigate it, which I feel like, at least for me as a member, I actually want to dismantle those bureaucracies. There was so much talk about plans and being able to understand the language of agencies. But then, where's the willingness? And I know that we're doing these listening sessions, but where's this willingness to sort of say, like, this doesn't work? Like, these bureaucracy and these languages. So how we actually understand the language of people, because the language of people, of real life people, is really simple. We don't, it's like we've made it a business to make it complicated. So I think for me, that's where I have reservations, right? Of like this planning, this process. And I know that, a lot of us wouldn't have jobs if this weren't the case. But I do think that it's like to really move forward and to start dismantling and have better equity outcomes, it really starts to really think about what are these processes and procedures and things like that really just reinforce the same thing. It's a different tool for the same reinforced system. And with that, I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Do any other roundtable members, and I'd like to open it up to other commissioners on the line, would like to add anything to this discussion at this point? Okay, I thought I saw heard someone pop up. That's just our ghost. I really appreciate everyone's perspectives, and thanks so much for sharing so much and being willing to discuss something that is ongoing and is really hard and is a conundrum for a lot of us. So thank you. And unless there's any other comments from our roundtable members or our commissioners, I'd like to move into public comment on this item. So Justin, do we have any public comments?
Thank you, Sequoia. I do not see anybody indicating they wish to make public comment at this time, either via a hand raise or a written comment. However, I know our earlier commenter, Leah Van Winkle, indicated that there might be others from her group wishing to make comment. Leah herself said she had to leave the meeting to attend to an issue. However, if there's anybody who is calling in at this time and not able to indicate through a hand raise, feel free to make your comment at this time. Okay, well, hearing nothing, it appears that we don't have any additional public comment at this time. Thank you, Sequoia.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask our Spanish translator if there are any public comments from the Spanish interpretation line.
Thank you. No public comment at the moment in Spanish.
Okay, gracias. So with that, I think we can close this panel discussion. Thank you very, very much again. And we can move on to our public comment for the meeting.
Sequoia, at this time, I still do not see any attendees indicating they wish to make public comment.
Great, thank you. All right. Well, I want to move slowly into finishing this out because I think there still might be some more discussion to be had, and we actually ended with some extra time, so we do have some some time. But as we approach our final agenda item for the day, I really, on behalf of our staff and the commission and our interagency partners, want to extend our deepest appreciation for the honest feedback and stories that have been shared today. In terms of major takeaways and action items, we've noted the following, and I appreciate that my teammates for sending me notes during this meeting. So for Caltrans, the Commission, and the California State Transportation Agency, we will work to ensure that leadership is present for the community listening sessions. Caltrans will work internally with district staff to coordinate a response to comments raised regarding encampments in Caltrans District 4. And we will continue to reflect on the insights shared by our panel members, including the importance of sharing power and really building authentic relationships with communities. Do any roundtable members have any questions or additions to these items? Okay. Commissioners that are on the line? Okay, so in terms of next steps, CTC staff will prepare a summary with notes from today's meeting, which we will share with all the roundtable members before posting online. All materials and the recording of this webinar will be posted on the Commission's website as well. And the next roundtable is scheduled for October 28th. And we are tentatively planning, excuse me, to discuss the Caltrans Equity Index tool, which and also about ensuring equity in competitive transportation funding programs. And we'll be in touch with the roundtable members as we build out the agenda. So once again, are there any final questions, comments from roundtable commissioners or the public before we wrap? And Chair Norton, I'm realizing that we can go back to your remarks from before. Thanks.
Thank you, because I just wanted to make sure that people knew that this is so important to us and that we really do want to see leadership at all levels, and that participating in these events, because as was talked about, this equity leadership is huge, and we want to make sure that the leaders in all of these agencies are addressing this in the same way and appreciating the time and effort that the roundtable members are giving. And I just wanted to make sure that as public comment that we recorded that we will ask that this be presented in our October meeting and agendized for the Caltrans portion of it as well. Thank you, and I want to thank all of the roundtable members for your time and your wisdom.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So unless there's any more questions, comments from roundtable members or the public, I want to say thank you so much to everyone who made this possible today, to our interagency partners, to our panelists, to our roundtable members, and the commissioners who were able to join us. Again, this is a process that, you know, as we start to unfold, we realize how much deeper and deeper and deeper it goes. And so I want to emphasize that we remain committed to continuing to work together to identify and improve equity outcomes in transportation in California and beyond. So thanks everybody for joining us today, and that is the conclusion of our meeting. Okay, thank you.